Friday, July 18, I set off from Brisbane on Belinda's big bus tour for brain injury awareness. I was on a mission in my big purple bus to be a moving billboard from community to community around Australia to break down barriers for those affected by brain injury. My own journey with brain injury began in March 2012 when my son Dylan sustained a life-threatening injuries in a car accident. Initially, they did not expect him to survive the night with multiple injuries, but most significant of all was a traumatic brain injury. He spent 2 weeks in a coma before waking and making slow but steady progress with his recovery. Dylan was then transferred to the neuro ward, and after a few weeks he had progressed enough in his recovery to be ready to transfer to brain injury rehabilitation unit. But due to limited beds, 26 in total, for the whole state of Queensland, we were put on a waiting list with no idea if or when a bed would become available. The first 6 months after a brain injury is the most optimal time for recovery. To know that your child may not receive the help they so desperately need when they need it is beyond frustrating. Meanwhile, they are taking up a bed in an acute ward when they no longer need that specific kind of care. The pressure as a single parent at the time was enormous. I couldn't work and we had no form of income. We lived on donations. I ceased to exist to my other children during very pivotal times of their lives. My daughter tried to carry the burden of running the home, studying for final exams in Year 12 and caring for her younger brother, and my mother would come straight from work to relieve me at Dylan's bedside each night. Dylan did eventually go to Biru after being moved around the hospital, where he spent 6 weeks before being discharged. This was just the beginning of a long road in his recovery, and once out of the system we discovered there were limited services and support for families and those affected. I did receive invaluable advice and support from a friend who had a lot of experience in rehabilitation, and I'm forever grateful to her. Her name was Kerry Reid. I realised with traumatic brain injury being an invisible disability, it's not openly discussed or understood. I became an advocate for those affected by brain injury and began volunteering for Synapse, a not-for-profit charity providing vital information and services for those affected by brain injury. I returned to work part-time as well as continuing to care for Dylan. In 2013, after the sale of my home, I decided to buy a bus. That's going to go on my headstone, apparently. Yes, I bought a bus. Being a middle-aged woman, restarting my life, I thought it was a great investment for my future, being a future home. But I could also use it to raise awareness for this important disability. I was also working on a screenplay, Chasing John, about a woman dealing with the harsh realities of life, who, with the inspiration from her idol, finds the courage to leave fears behind and follow her dreams. I worked on the screenplay during the long hours that I was at the hospital as a way of escape and a means of release. An important part of the storyline being brain injury. I wanted to create a better understanding of how the invisible disability of traumatic brain injury affects people through the big screen. Some common effects that can include fatigue, mental and physical, decreased speed of processing or responding to information. This can lead to the misconception that intellect has been affected, which is often not the case. Some people have difficulties with impulse control and insight, leading them to behave in a way that is socially inappropriate. Without the realisation that they may have an ABI, others may show physical changes, including loss of fine motor control and slurring of speech, leading them to appear intoxicated. Anger, irritability, agitation, low tolerance and impulsivity are also other common effects of brain injury. During this time, the full realisation of the ongoing effects of the traumatic brain injury for my son were becoming clear. His life was in limbo, and he wanted to return to work and a life of independence, but his previous job was no longer the right fit. Here we were 2.5 years down the track, and I didn't know how to help him move forward. Because my son's original outcome was so dire, yet he had recovered far greater than predicted, I was running on adrenaline, which your body can only do for so long before you hit adrenal fatigue. It was at this point that I crashed. I couldn't work and I struggled to leave the house. I realised that Dylan still needed help, and so did I. I began the fight to have my son recognised as having a disability so he could access disability services and find employment in a workplace and be in a position that would be supportive of his abilities. Earlier this year, he found exactly that, the right position for him, which just so happens to be as a wardsman at the PA hospital where he recovered. This has given him back a sense of purpose and his independence. With Dylan now working, I could fulfil my vision of touring Australia to raise awareness. I drove 8,121 kilometres around Australia through 6 states in 32 days. I drove down the coast to Sydney, over to Canberra, then up through Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, and then up through the centre to Tennant Creek and back across to the border and down. I visited various hospitals, rehabilitation centres and schools. I delivered vital books and information packs from Synapse. My tour featured in numerous newspapers, on radio as well as TV. I met countless inspiring individuals who themselves are living with or affected by brain injury. Some of these people drove hours just to come and speak with someone they knew had lived experience and who would understand the traumatic and challenging journey after acquiring a brain injury, and all they really wanted was just to be heard. I have understood the great importance in the community of carers. A recent submission by Carers Queensland for the Queensland Health Brain Injury Rehabilitation Planning Project found that there were huge gaps in the transfer to community care from inpatient rehabilitation service. There was lack of information, sharing and collaborative approaches between medical, allied health and community rehabilitation services, inconsistent delivery of services, lack of consistency in delivery of outpatient services and access to these services in a reasonable time frame. Lack of psychological support post-injury, both for the injured person and the family of the patient. Services are not individualised or person-centre based on the level of the injury, but are perceived as being generic and unable to be modified to an individual's needs. Unpaid carers represent a precious economic source. It is estimated that $8.3 billion in resources would be required each year from the government's health and community sector to replace the work carried out by unpaid carers in Queensland, where their service is no longer available. We do need better support for our carers. I, along with Synapse, are committed to working to effect change for those affected by traumatic brain injury. I have recently been added to the official Synapse team in my new role as Brain Injury Family Liaison Officer. This position was generously funded by a benefactor. The role will see me initially meeting people in the hospital setting and being a continued point of contact during their brain injury journey to connect them with Synapse, who will in turn connect them with services in the community to hopefully make the transition home and back to the community a little easier. Through my own lived experience, I have learned the importance of self-care when you're caring, having resilience and the importance of building your crew. I would never have gotten through this time without my crew. I have had an amazing support circle of friends, but most importantly, I have been blessed with an amazing family. My mother, Fran, taught me what it was to be a strong woman and has been by my side every step. My daughter, Michaela, picked up the ball for me many times when I dropped it. And my son, Hudson, though he's only 18 years of age, is the wisest man I know. And of course, Dylan, the most inspiring person I've ever met. He is my superhero. He's worked really hard to be where he is today, and he never gave up. Linda's big bus tour would not have been possible without all the people who donated. Verona was one of them. And the various fundraisers, and most notably All Roads Queensland, who donated directly $2,000 for my fuel. I'd like to thank Simply Human for inviting me to be part of their event tonight. It's wonderful to be around like-minded people who are all working towards making the community a better place for all.
Thank you so much, Belinda.